All right, you magnificent bastards, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a question that's probably crossed your mind after a few too many beers.
Oh, yeah.
What the hell is a great power anyway?
Hmm.
You know those countries that strut around the global playground like they own the damn place?
It's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
And it's more complicated than just having a big-ass military or a fat stack of cash.
Right, because if it were just about money, Bill Gates would be launching nukes, not tweeting about vaccines. So let's cut the crap and go way back, like powdered wig, fancy pants-wearing motherfuckers back in 1815 at the Congress of Vienna. They had this little shindig after Napoleon decided to play world domination, and it was basically the birth of the Great Power Club.
Yeah.
You had Austria, France, Prussia, Russia, and Great Britain, the OG badasses of Europe.
The Congress of Vienna was all about restoring order after the Napoleonic Wars. They basically redrew the map of Europe and established a system where these five powers would call the shots.
So like a bunch of frat boys divvying up the beer pong table after a wild party?
Kind of. But they were deadly serious about maintaining their power and influence. They even created this thing called the Concert of Europe, which was basically a gentleman's agreement to chill the fuck out and prevent any one country from getting too powerful. Think of it as an early attempt at a global peacekeeping organization,
Okay.
but run by a bunch of dudes who love their empires and fancy hats.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Did it actually work?
For a while, surprisingly.
Really?
They managed to avoid any major wars in Europe for about 40 years. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses. This whole system was built on the idea that power meant military might. The historian A.J.P. Taylor once said,
Oh yeah, I've heard of him.
the test of a great power was its strength for war. So while these guys were sipping tea and talking diplomacy, they were also busy building up their armies and navies just in case.
Classic dick measuring contest, just with fancier outfits. But eventually someone had to go and fuck it all up, right?
You're talking about World War I.
Bingo. All that pent-up aggression and nationalism had to explode somewhere.
World War I was a total game changer. It shattered the old order, and when the dust settled, the map of Europe was redrawn again. The Austrian Empire was gone, the Ottoman Empire was on its last legs, and Russia was in the midst of a bloody revolution.
And the victors got to decide who was in and who was out of the new Great Power Club.
Pretty much. The winners of World War I,
Okay.
Britain, France, Italy, Japan, and the U.S. emerged as the dominant powers.
Interesting.
They formed the League of Nations with the goal of preventing another global bloodbath. But it was pretty flawed from the start.
What do you mean?
Well, for one thing, the U.S., despite being a key player in the war, decided to sit this one out. They didn't join the League of Nations, which basically weakened it from the get-go.
Typical American bullshit. We'll help you win the war, but don't expect us to clean up the mess.
And, of course, Germany, the biggest loser of World War I, was pissed off and looking for revenge. They felt humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles, which blamed them for the war and imposed harsh penalties.
So basically they set the stage for round two.
Yes, exactly. Fast forward a couple of decades, and boom, World War II.
This time it was even more fucked up. We're talking Nazis, atomic bombs, the whole 9 yards.
World War II was a global catastrophe, but it also solidified the rise of a new breed of power, the superpower.
Okay, so who decided some countries get to be super?
Right.
Do they get a goddamn cape and a special handshake?
The term superpower was coined after World War II to describe the U.S. and the Soviet Union. These two countries had emerged from the war with unparalleled military and economic power. They also possessed nuclear weapons, which gave them a whole new level of destructive capability.
Ah, the good old fuck you, I've got nukes strategy. That'll definitely get you a seat at the big boy table. So the Cold War was basically a global pissing contest between these two superpowers.
It was a tense standoff with both sides vying for influence around the world. They never went to war directly, but they fought a bunch of proxy wars in places like Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan.
And while these two were busy flexing their muscles, other countries were trying to figure out their place in this new world order.
Right. You had the rebuilding of Japan, France, the UK, and West Germany. They were all trying to recover from the war and regain some semblance of power and influence.
Okay.
But there were questions about whether they could ever truly regain their great power status.
Yeah, it's like trying to win a street fight after getting your ass kicked twice.
Right.
But what about China? They've always been this sleeping giant, right?
They were definitely playing the long game. They had the population, and after the war, their economy and military started to grow rapidly.
So they were like, hold my beer, I'm about to fuck shit up.
Something like that. It was clear they wouldn't be content sitting on the sidelines forever.
All right, so we've gone from powdered wigs to nukes.
Hmm.
That's a pretty wild ride. But let's fast forward to today. Who actually runs the world now? Is it still the fuck you, I've got nukes club?
The modern landscape is a lot more complicated. We'll dive into that next time.
All right, you heard the man. We've covered the basics from those powdered wig days to the nuclear age. But the story doesn't end there. Tune in next time as we unpack who's calling the shots in today's world and what the future holds for this whole great power bullshit. Stay informed and stay skeptical.
Yeah.
Welcome back, you power-hungry degenerates. Last time, we left off with the world stage looking like a goddamn Thunderdome after World War II. Two superpowers with more nukes than sense. A bunch of countries trying to lick their wounds and rebuild, and China lurking in the shadows like a pissed-off panda. So let's dive into the modern landscape, shall we?
Yeah.
Who's calling the shots in this crazy-ass world?
Well, it's not as simple as pointing to one country and saying, they're the boss now. The days of single-country dominance are kind of over.
So it's more like a game of fuck, marry, kill with countries. Who are we marrying for convenience, and who are we nuking into oblivion?
That's one way to put it. But seriously, we've got this thing called the UN Security Council.
Right.
Which was supposed to be the grown-up table where the big kids discuss global issues and prevent another world war.
You mean that place where everyone pretends to get along while secretly plotting to screw each other over?
Pretty much. But it's still important because the 5 permanent members, the US, UK, France, Russia, and China,
The gang's all here.
each have veto power. That means they can basically shut down any resolution they don't like.
So it's like a high school clique where the popular kids get to decide who gets stuffed in lockers.
Except the lockers are full of nuclear warheads. But here's where it gets interesting. The UN Security Council reflects the power dynamics of the post-World War II era,
Okay.
but the world has changed a lot since then.
You're telling me. We've gone from rotary phones to smartphones, from disco to whatever the hell kids are listening to these days. Shit changes, man. So who are the new players shaking things up?
Well, you can't talk about modern power dynamics without talking about China.
Right.
Their economic and military growth over the past few decades has been insane.
Yeah, those sneaky bastards have been playing the long game. While everyone else was busy fighting wars and snorting cocaine, they were building factories and buying up half the world's resources.
They've invested heavily in infrastructure technology and military modernization. They're also expanding their global influence through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, which is basically a massive infrastructure project connecting Asia, Europe, and Africa.
Sounds like they're trying to build their own goddamn empire. But do they have what it takes to be a real superpower? I mean, they've got the cash and the muscle, but do they have the brains and the balls to call the shots on the world stage?
That's a big question. They're definitely challenging the U.S.'s dominance, but they're also facing their own set of challenges. They have a rapidly aging population, a growing wealth gap, and a political system that's not exactly known for its transparency or human rights record.
So they're like the rich kid who inherited daddy's money but still doesn't know how to tie their own shoes.
It's more complicated than that. But they're definitely not a perfect superpower, and their rise is creating a lot of anxiety and tension, especially in the Asia-Pacific region.
Speaking of anxiety and tension, let's talk about the elephant in the room.
Oh boy.
Russia. Those crazy bastards are like a drunk bear with a nuclear arsenal. Never know what they're going to do next.
Russia is a fascinating case study in how a country can leverage its strengths and weaknesses to exert influence on the world stage. They have a relatively weak economy compared to the US or China, but they have a powerful military, a shit ton of nuclear weapons, and a leader who's not afraid to use them.
Putin's basically a real-life Bond villain. He's got the icy stare, the ruthless ambition, and the total disregard for human life. The only thing missing is a fluffy white cat.
He's definitely a force to be reckoned with. He's shown a willingness to use military force to achieve his goals, as we saw in Georgia, Ukraine, and Syria. He's also a master manipulator using propaganda and disinformation to sow chaos and undermine his opponents.
So he's basically playing the game on hard mode with cheat codes.
Something like that. He's using every tool at his disposal to make Russia relevant again, and it's working. They're a major player in the Middle East, they're meddling in elections all over the world, and they're constantly testing the limits of NATO's patience.
Sounds like those motherfuckers are keeping themselves busy.
Yeah.
But what about the rest of the world? Is it all just superpowers and their wannabe sidekicks?
Not at all. There's a whole spectrum of countries with varying levels of influence and power. You've got regional powers like India, Brazil, and Turkey, who are all trying to assert themselves on the global stage.
It's like a goddamn popularity contest where everyone's trying to get invited to the cool kids party.
Exactly. These countries are all vying for a seat at the table, and they're using a variety of strategies to get there. Economic clout, military might, diplomatic maneuvering, you name it.
Because it's not just about nukes anymore. You can actually be a big deal without threatening to blow up the planet.
You'd be surprised. Take Germany, for example. They're an economic powerhouse. They play a key role in the European Union, and they're a major player in international diplomacy. But they don't have nuclear weapons.
Wait, so they're like the rich kid who gets all the girls but can't fight their way out of a paper bag.
Not exactly. They've chosen to focus on economic and soft power, and it's working for them. They've become a leader in areas like renewable energy and climate change policy, and they're using their economic leverage to shape global trade and finance.
So you're telling me you don't need a giant dick to be a big deal in the world? Mind blown.
There are many paths to power and influence, but one thing is for sure, it's a goddamn competitive world out there, and everyone's trying to get a piece of the action.
All right, we've covered the big boys, the up-and-comers, and the nucleus wonders. But what about the old guard? What about those countries that used to rule the world, but are now kind of like the washed-up rock stars living off their past glory?
We'll get to them, and trust me, it's a fascinating story of how power fades and empires crumble, but that's a tale for our next installment.
All right, you heard the man. We've unpacked the modern power landscape, the rise of China, the resurgence of Russia, and the various ways countries are trying to get a leg up in this global Game of Thrones. Tune in next time as we wrap things up and explore what the future holds for this whole great power bullshit. Stay informed, stay skeptical, and don't trust anyone, especially not those motherfuckers with their fingers on the big red button. Welcome back to the Deep Dive, you glorious bastards. In the last two parts, we've journeyed through the history of great powers, from those powdered wig-wearing motherfuckers carving up maps to the nuke-wielding asshats playing global chicken. We've seen empires rise and fall, alliances shift like the desert sands, and enough backstabbing and power-grabbing to make Machiavelli blush.
We've covered a lot of ground, that's for sure, but the real question is, where the hell are we headed?
Right. It's all well and good to talk about who's got the biggest dick on the global playground right now. But what about the future? Are we all going to end up living in some Mad Max wasteland fighting over scraps and gasoline? Or will we somehow manage to avoid blowing ourselves to smithereens and actually build a somewhat decent future for humanity?
Those are the million-dollar questions, aren't they? And unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball.
Right.
If I did, I'd be sipping margaritas on my private island instead of sitting here talking to you.
Damn straight. So what can we say about the future of this whole great power bullshit? What trends should we be paying attention to besides the obvious, don't trust anyone with a nuclear launch code?
Well, one thing's for sure, the world is becoming increasingly multipolar. It's not just about the US and China anymore.
Right.
We've got a whole bunch of players vying for influence. Russia, India, Brazil, the European Union, all with their own agendas and ambitions.
Well, it's less like a boxing match and more like a goddamn Royal Rumble.
Exactly.
Oh boy.
And that makes predicting the future even more difficult. There are so many variables at play: economic shifts, technological advancements, political upheavals. It's enough to make your head spin.
Yeah, my brain's already fried from trying to keep up with all this shit. So give it to me straight, Doc. What are the biggest potential fuck-ups we should be worried about?
Well, one major concern is the rise of nationalism and populism around the world. We're seeing a trend towards isolationism, protectionism, and a rejection of global cooperation. That's not exactly a recipe for a stable and peaceful world order.
Yeah, it's like everyone's decided to build their own little walls and stock up on ammo instead of trying to work together to solve problems.
Yeah.
What a bunch of short-sighted asshats.
It's definitely a worrying trend.
Yeah.
And it's fueled by a number of factors: economic anxiety, cultural resentment, political polarization, the spread of disinformation through social media, you name it. It's a complex mess.
So basically we're all fucked.
Not necessarily. There are also positive trends emerging. We're seeing a growing awareness of global challenges like climate change, inequality, and pandemics. And there are people and organizations working hard to address these issues and build a more sustainable and equitable future.
So it's not all doom and gloom. There's still hope for humanity.
There's always hope.
Yeah.
But it's going to take a lot of work, a lot of cooperation, and a hell of a lot of luck to navigate the challenges ahead. We need to find ways to bridge divides, build trust, and create a system where countries can compete and cooperate without resorting to violence.
Sounds like a tall order, especially with all those trigger-happy motherfuckers out there.
It is, but it's not impossible.
Yeah.
One thing that could help is a shift away from traditional notions of power. We need to move beyond this zero-sum game where one country's gain is another country's loss.
So you're saying we need to redefine what it means to be a great power.
Exactly. We need to recognize that power isn't just about military might or economic dominance. It's also about things like innovation, sustainability, social justice, and global cooperation. The countries that excel in these areas will be the ones shaping the future.
So it's not just about who's got the biggest guns anymore. Maybe those tree-hugging hippies were onto something after all.
There's definitely a growing recognition that we need to find more sustainable and equitable ways to live on this planet. And the countries that embrace this shift will be the ones leading the way.
All right, so let's wrap this shit up. We've explored the history of great powers, dissected the current landscape, and gazed into the murky abyss of the future. What's the takeaway for our listeners besides stocking up on canned goods and learning how to make Molotov cocktails?
The takeaway is this: the world is a complex and constantly changing place. There are no easy answers, and the future is uncertain. But that doesn't mean we should give up hope. We need to stay informed, stay engaged, and keep pushing for a better future.
Damn straight. We've got to stay informed, not just about who's got the biggest nukes, but about the ideas and movements that are shaping the world. And we've got to stay engaged, not just by bitching about politicians on social media, but by actually getting involved in our communities and making our voices heard.
Exactly. We all have a role to play in shaping the future, whether it's through our choices as consumers, our participation in democracy, or our support for organizations working to make a difference.
All right, folks, that's it for our deep dive into the world of great powers. We've covered a lot of ground, and hopefully we've left you with more questions than answers, because that's what makes this whole damn thing so fascinating. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep fighting for a better future. And remember, if you ever find yourself in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, always double tap the zombies.
And for God's sake, don't eat the yellow snow.
Later.